In 1963, Pontiac made a car so powerful it was ready to take over the racing world. But just when the Super Duty 421 was set to win, the people in charge shut it down. Unfortunately, that's what happened with the 1963 Pontiac Super Duty 421. The truth will shock you. History. The story of Pontiac's 421 engine is one of ambition, competition, and a little bit of rule-breaking. It all started in the early 1960s when Pontiac found itself in a fierce battle against Chevrolet, Ford, and Plymouth. These companies were fighting for dominance in the world of high-performance cars, and Pontiac was determined to come out on top. At that time, Pontiac had already made a name for itself with its powerful 389 engine, but something bigger was coming. The engineers at Pontiac knew that if they wanted to compete with the larger engines from other brands, they needed something more powerful. That's when they started working on a new engine that would change everything, the 421. From the very beginning, the 421 was not just another engine. It was created in secret, far from the eyes of competitors and even some executives within General Motors. The goal was simple: to make Pontiac unbeatable on the racetrack. And with the help of a few bold engineers, that mission was well underway. As Pontiac worked on developing the 421, they faced a major challenge. In the early 1960s, racing success was the key to selling cars. If a car could dominate on the track, it would fly off the showroom floor. However, Pontiac's existing engines were starting to fall behind the bigger engines of other manufacturers. The answer was to build something stronger, and that's exactly what they did. Before the 421 became an official production engine, Pontiac had to find a way to test it in real racing conditions. That's when they turned to Mickey Thompson, one of the biggest names in motorsports at the time. With his help, Pontiac secretly placed the 421 engine into race cars, allowing it to compete against the best in the business before anyone even knew it existed. The first real public appearance of the 421 happened in 1961. At the NHRAUS Nationals, Pontiac shocked everyone when Hayden Proffitt drove a Mickey Thompson-built Catalina equipped with a powerful new engine. The Pontiac didn't just win, it dominated. That race sent a clear message to Ford, Chevrolet, and Plymouth. Pontiac was here to win. However, Pontiac wasn't supposed to be running a 421 at that time. Officially, the largest engine available from the company was a 389. But Pontiac had found a clever way around the rules. They created the 421 as a special racing engine, only available to select racers who knew how to ask for it. This meant that while other companies were following the rule book, Pontiac was bending it to their advantage. By 1962, word had spread about Pontiac's secret weapon. Racers wanted it, dealerships wanted it, and customers wanted it. Pontiac finally decided to make the 421 an official production option. But this wasn't just a regular release. It was done with the intention of keeping Pontiac at the front of the competition. The engine was now available to anyone who knew how to order the right package. As the 421st continued to gain popularity, its success on the track became impossible to ignore. In drag racing, stock car racing, and even street racing, Pontiac's new engine was proving to be nearly unstoppable. It was so dominant that other manufacturers had no choice but to respond with their own high-performance engines. Even Chevrolet, Pontiac's corporate sibling, was paying close attention. There was an unspoken rule within General Motors that no division should outshine the others too much. But Pontiac was pushing the limits, and the 421 was making too much noise. That meant trouble was coming. By 1963, Pontiac was still riding high on its racing success. But behind the scenes, things were changing. General Motors had started pulling back from factory-supported racing, and Pontiac was about to be caught in the crossfire. The company's winning streak had drawn too much attention, and the higher-ups at GM weren't happy about it. Suddenly, Pontiac's biggest advantage was becoming a problem. While other brands within GM were still playing by the rules, Pontiac had been taking risks. The 421 had given them an edge, but now that edge was starting to look like a liability. The question was no longer about how fast Pontiac could go. It was about whether they would be allowed to keep going at all. At that moment, Pontiac's future in racing was uncertain. The company had built a reputation for bending the rules and finding ways to outsmart its competition. But with GM stepping in, Pontiac had to make a choice: keep pushing the limits or step back and play by the new corporate rules. What happened next would change everything. Well, Pontiac wasn't ready to give up. Instead of backing down, the company did something shocking. It built an engine so powerful that it would dominate the competition. This was the 421 Super Duty, an engine designed for one purpose: winning. At the time, Pontiac's biggest engine was the 389 cubic inch V8, but that wasn't enough. So, Pontiac engineers took the 389, bored it out, and strengthened every part. The result was a massive 421 cubic inch powerhouse that was stronger, tougher, and far more advanced than anything Pontiac had ever built. Why this engine was so special? The 421 Super Duty wasn't just another big engine, it was built differently. Every piece of it was designed to handle extreme power and high-speed racing. The engine had a forged steel crankshaft that was nearly indestructible, along with forged steel connecting rods that could handle intense stress. Unlike standard engines, which used cast pistons, the 421 Super Duty had forged aluminum pistons that were lighter and stronger. To keep the engine breathing properly, Pontiac gave it high-flow cylinder heads borrowed from the powerful 389 Super Duty. On top of that sat dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors, feeding the engine a massive amount of fuel and air. This setup pushed the official horsepower rating to 405 horsepower, but experts knew the real number was much higher. Built for speed, engineered for strength. Power wasn't the only impressive part. The 421 Super Duty had a compression ratio of 11.0 to 1 in 1962, which increased to 12.0 to 1:1 in 1963. That meant more fuel was squeezed into each cylinder, creating more explosive power. To make the Catalina even faster, Pontiac shaved weight by using aluminum components in the front end and even drilling holes in the frame to reduce unnecessary bulk. This wasn't an engine for just anyone. It was built for racers and serious drivers who wanted an unbeatable machine under the hood. But raw power needed the right transmission to harness it. That's where Pontiac made another smart move. 2 transmission choices for maximum power. Pontiac knew that the 421 Super Duty needed a transmission strong enough to handle its monstrous torque. That's why Pontiac offered 2 options, each designed for different types of drivers. 4-speed manual. For those who wanted full control, Pontiac paired the 421 Super Duty with the Borg-Warner T10 4-speed manual transmission. This was a close-ratio gearbox designed specifically for high-performance cars. It allowed drivers to shift quickly, launch aggressively, and stay in the power band at all times. This transmission became the favorite among drag racers and street racers alike. The T10 was built tough and able to handle the extreme forces of a high-revving V8 without braking. In fact, nearly all manual transmission Super Duty cars came with this setup because it was simply the best for serious competition. 3-speed automatic. But not everyone wanted a manual. For those looking for consistent performance, Pontiac also offered an automatic transmission option. The Hydra-matic and the Roto-Hydra-matic, Slim Jim, were both available. The Hydra-matic was a well-known heavy-duty automatic, but the Roto-Hydra-matic was a unique lightweight option. It was smaller, more compact, and used a split torque design, which made it more efficient. While automatics weren't as popular among racers, some factory-built drag cars used them for their consistent shifting and launch performance, the engineering that set it apart. What made the 421 Super Duty even more shocking was the fact that Pontiac never built big block or small block engines. Unlike Chevy or Ford, Pontiac designed one engine family with all V8s sharing the same basic architecture. That meant the 421 was actually an evolution of the 389, not a completely separate big block like a Chevy 454 or Chrysler 440. Even though it wasn't technically a big block, it still packed big block power. The 6.9-liter displacement, combined with its race-ready components, made it one of the most feared engines of its time. The combination of raw power, advanced engineering, and durable materials made the 421 Super Duty truly legendary. Pontiac didn't just build an engine, they made a statement. The 421 Super Duty wasn't about playing it safe or following the rules. It was about pushing the limits of what was possible in a factory-built car. Pontiac engineers worked around the clock, refining every detail. They knew that this engine would face the toughest competition in NASCAR and drag racing. And they were right. The 421 Super Duty didn't just compete, it dominated. The peak of Pontiac's engineering. By 1963, the 421 Super Duty had reached its most advanced form. With an impressive compression ratio, higher redline, and even more aggressive tuning, it was stronger than ever. Every part was fine-tuned for maximum durability and performance. Even the Catalina itself was modified to match the engine's power. Lighter weight, stiffer suspension, and improved aerodynamics made it a true racing machine. Pontiac had taken an already powerful engine and pushed it to the absolute limit. But Pontiac's boldness came at a cost. General Motors had other plans, and not everyone was happy with how Pontiac was bending the rules. The success of the 421 Super Duty put Pontiac in a tough position. Would the company be allowed to continue its dominance, or would corporate pressure force them to change course? The ban that changed everything. At first, Pontiac's leadership believed they could keep pushing the limits. The 421 Super Duty was too good to ignore, and its success was bringing Pontiac more attention than ever. But behind closed doors, trouble was brewing. In January 1963, General Motors made a shocking announcement. The company was banning all factory-backed racing. Just like that, the 421 Super Duty program was over. Pontiac engineers, racers, and fans couldn't believe it. The most powerful engine they had ever built was now forbidden. GM claimed the decision was about safety concerns, but not everyone believed that. Many insiders whispered that Chevrolet executives had something to do with it. Pontiac's racing success was stealing the spotlight from Chevy, and some believed jealousy played a role. The ban wasn't just a suggestion, it was strict. Any GM employee caught working on race engines would be fired immediately. GM executives even raided Pontiac factories, destroying blueprints and shutting down production lines. It was as if they wanted the 421 Super Duty to disappear completely. Secret plans to defy. Pontiac's engineers weren't ready to give up so easily. They had poured their hearts into the 421 Super Duty, and they weren't about to let it be erased without a fight. In secret, they stashed away 6 complete engines in a hidden warehouse. Alongside them was something even more shocking, a detailed map leading straight to Daytona. Pontiac had built these engines for one reason: to dominate NASCAR. With GM's ban in place, it seemed impossible to race them, but some inside Pontiac still believed there was a way. Would they dare to defy GM and put the 421 Super Duty on the track one last time? The AMA agreement and its impact. To understand why GM made this move, we need to look back at the American Manufacturers Association agreement. In 1957, major U.S. automakers, including GM, Ford, and Chrysler, signed this agreement, promising to stay out of racing. On paper, it was meant to promote safety and keep car companies from focusing too much on high-speed performance. But the reality was very different. Companies like Pontiac, Chevrolet, and Ford kept developing race engines anyway. They just found sneaky ways to do it, supporting teams under the table and selling high-performance parts quietly. The 421 Super Duty itself was a perfect example of how Pontiac played this game. Then, in the early 1960s, Ford and Chrysler backed out of the agreement entirely. They no longer cared about keeping their racing programs a secret. This put GM in a tough position. Would they follow their rivals and go all in on racing, or would they stick to their original promise? The pressure builds on GM, and Ford's and Chrysler's exit from the AMA agreement wasn't just a bold move. It was a direct challenge to GM. With those companies free to advertise speed and horsepower, GM's top executives began to worry. If they didn't take control of the situation, things could spiral out of their hands. At the same time, AMC's president, Roy Abernethy, was making things even worse for GM. On January 18, 1963, he gave a speech criticizing Ford and Chrysler for abandoning the AMA agreement. He warned that if car companies kept pushing high-performance racing, they would attract unwanted attention from the federal government. Abernethy's words were powerful. He made it seem like racing was a dangerous game that could bring legal trouble to any company involved. GM's top executives weren't sure if the government was actually pressuring them or if Abernethy was just stirring the pot. Either way, they weren't willing to take any chances. GM's final decision. Within hours of Abernethy's speech, GM's executives held an emergency meeting. They decided that enough was enough. Pontiac's racing program had to go. It wasn't just about the 421 Super Duty. GM also shut down Chevrolet's 427 Mystery Motor and every other high-performance engine program across all of its brands. On January 24, 1963, Pontiac sent out an internal memo announcing the immediate cancellation of the 421 Super Duty. The message was clear: the racing era was over. Any Pontiac employee caught breaking this rule would be fired without hesitation. For Pontiac's engineers and racers, this was devastating news. Some had spent years perfecting the 421 Super Duty, only to see it vanish overnight. But the biggest question remained: would Pontiac really let GM shut them down completely, or did they have another trick up their sleeve? Not quite. The story of the 421 wasn't just about its downfall. It was also about its raw power, hidden weaknesses, and the legendary cars it powered. The power that made it a legend. From the moment Pontiac introduced the 421 Super Duty in 1961, it was a force to be reckoned with. This was no ordinary engine. It was built for speed, power, and domination. With a high-performance camshaft, forged rods, and massive dual 4-barrel carburetors, it pushed well over 400 horsepower. That was enough to leave competitors in the dust. On the drag strip, the 421 Super Duty turned Pontiac's Catalina into a street monster. In NASCAR, it gave Pontiac an edge against Ford and Chrysler. No one could ignore the fact that this engine was changing the game. But with all that power came a few problems. Performance issues. Despite its success, the 421 Super Duty had some issues under the hood. One of the biggest problems was its aluminum exhaust manifolds. They were lightweight, which helped with performance, but under extreme heat, they could melt. That was not ideal for race cars running at full throttle for long periods. Then, there was the issue with the cylinder heads. The early versions didn't have enough space for larger valves, limiting airflow and, ultimately, power potential. Pontiac fixed this in 1967 by redesigning the heads, but by then, The 421 Super Duty had already been banned. Reliability was another concern. While the engine was incredibly powerful, reports of oil leaks and crankshaft failures weren't uncommon, especially under heavy use. Even the best-built race engines had limits, and the 421 was no exception. Legacy. Even with these issues, the 421 Super Duty found its way into some of Pontiac's most iconic cars. The Catalina Super Duty was a monster on the streets and the track. The Grand Prix Super Duty combined performance with style, making it a favorite among speed enthusiasts. But the rarest of them all? The 1963 Pontiac Tempest Super Duty. This car was so extreme that it earned the nickname Swiss cheese, because Pontiac drilled holes into the frame to shave off weight. Only 14 of these cars were ever built, making them some of the most sought-after muscle cars today. Between 1962 and 1963, Pontiac built just 267 cars with the 421 Super Duty engine. These cars weren't just fast, they were history in motion. Today, they are worth a fortune. A well-preserved Catalina Super Duty can sell for over $125,000, while a rare Tempest Super Duty has been auctioned for an eye-watering $455,000. Well, Pontiac may have lost the battle against GM's racing ban, but it wasn't ready to give up. The knowledge gained from the 421 Super Duty program didn't go to waste. Instead, Pontiac engineers took everything they had learned and put it into a new project, the 1964 Pontiac GTO. The GTO wasn't just a car, it was the birth of the muscle car era. With a 389 cubic inch V8, race-inspired camshafts, and a powerful intake system, it carried the spirit of the 421 Super Duty in a street-legal package. GM executives didn't see it coming, but by the time they realized what Pontiac had done, it was too late. The GTO was a massive hit, and it paved the way for future legends like the Firebird and the Trans Am. Without the 421 Super Duty, Pontiac's muscle car legacy might never have happened. It may have been banned from racing, but its impact lasted for decades. Final thoughts. So, was the 421 Super Duty a perfect engine? It had its flaws, from overheating manifolds to oil leaks. But was it a game changer? Absolutely. It dominated the track, scared GM executives, and left a lasting mark on muscle car history. Pontiac fought hard to push the limits of performance, and even when corporate pressure shut them down, they found a way to keep the dream alive. The 421 Super Duty may be gone, but its legend lives on in every muscle car that came after it. And that's the wild story of Pontiac's legendary 421 engine. Built for domination, banned from competition, and still one of the greatest V8s ever made. What do you think? Was the ban fair, or did Pontiac get robbed? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into automotive history. See you in the next one.